All right, let's go ahead and get started. So good morning again. My name is Eric Law with EADOC. This webinar is on risk mitigation through information relationships. I'll be doing the presentation for you guys this morning. Unfortunately, Michiko was not able to join us as she was pulled into a project meeting for one of the jobs that she's currently managing with East Bay Mud. Now, one of the things we're going to get started here with this morning is talking about the risk mitigation through information relationships. How do you map information back and forth on your projects? And so what you can see here is I brought up an information relationship diagram that shows me all the information around proposal request number one. And with this, I'm seeing the change order that proposal request number one is part of. I'm seeing my risk item that I was tracking that potential change order under. I'm seeing communication and documentation relevant to this particular risk item. So I can see some schedule activities. I can see RFIs, submittals, another schedule activity. And then I can see some drawings and some subsequently linked information here. And what this tool is doing is it's giving me a graphical overview of how does information and communication relate to other information here on my capital project. And so this is a very powerful tool for you guys in managing capital projects, whether it's a project manager doing research on a particular issue on a project, or if you do get into a claim situation, we're going to talk about how this tool can help you guys out there. So we're going to go through a couple PowerPoint slides, talk about the information relationships, how they're created and so forth, and then after those slides, we'll jump into the EADOC application. I'll give you guys some tips and tricks on how to get the high quality data that you need for these tools to generate these reports. The overall agenda for the presentation here is we're going to talk about the information relationships, how they apply for reducing risk, the benefits of managing these relationships between data. We're going to talk about keys to managing the information relationships, how this information is used in claims and litigation on your project. And then we're going to dive into actually managing the information relationships in the EADOC application. We're going to talk about document relationships, where a submittal relates to specs and drawings. An issue item can relate to schedule activities. We'll talk about the cost side of it, with the potential change orders, the change orders. We'll talk about the risk relationships. How do you manage those risk items? How do you bring in those schedule activities? And then we're also going to talk about creating relationships to information in other systems. How do you tie these into ArcGIS tools? How do you tie these into other third-party products? Because one of the things on these capital projects is you do have a lot of data stored in different applications and different systems. And then the reporting aspect of it. So how do I draw those diagrams? How do I get those nice reports on my capital projects so I can use them for research and analysis? Now, when we talk about the risk reduction benefits here of information relationship and information, one of the key features is easy to find information. When you're managing a capital project, you're going to be generating a lot of information, a lot of communication on these projects. So you want to make it easy for the engineers and the project managers and the directors that are overseeing these projects to find that information quickly. With any type of issue or risk that appears on a project, it can take a long duration to resolve that particular issue. And so when you create these relationships and information, you create these links. So this way, when somebody comes to you and says, hey, how do we end up at change order 1.1? Why do we have to spend this $200,000 on this particular project? You can use these relationships to bring up the story behind that particular issue. So how did you end up there at that particular change? Well, there was a proposal request that was involved, there was a risk item, there was RFIs, there were schedule activities. And so you can use this visual to tell that story of here's how we ended up at this particular issue on the project. And so this way you can justify it to the stakeholders and the project participants on the job how you end up at that particular change. It also makes it very easy to track large volumes of data. You know, on these particular projects, especially when you get into heavy infrastructure like the treatment plant side, you're going to be generating potentially thousands of submittals and RFIs on these jobs. And by creating the relationships and the relevance to this information, you can run these reports so I can see everything relevant to a particular drawing. I can bring up a civil drawing and it's going to show me all my submittals relevant. So by organizing and structuring the relationships between this information, it's going to make it a lot easier to go back in time and take a look at a particular drawing and say, okay, here's all the submittals that were turned into it. You know, we had a large volume of RFIs on the project, and they were all related to a particular spec section. So you can use it also to go back to a project and say, hey, maybe we should revise the specification section. What is it about the spec section that's causing a lot of issues? So with all this data organized and structured and related to the other relevant information, it gives you a very powerful tool for not only evaluating claims and change orders, but just in terms of how you manage your projects. Also, it gives you the ability to track the issues over a long period of time. Sometimes on these capital projects, the issue could be in progress for a year, 2 years, or more before it's actually completely resolved. A lot of times you may identify an issue and it may not actually come to a full change order until a year into the project. And so by being able to track the risk of the issue items and the information relevant to it, as that issue evolves over time and there's communication, I can track them all tied to it using the links here in the system and the relationships. And all three of these benefits go towards reducing the risk. The objective of using software and tools on these projects is to manage this information in a very organized and structured manner, so you're reducing the risk of potential claims and delays on your projects as that project progresses. Now, some of the keys to managing these information relationships. One thing to keep in mind is garbage in, garbage out. You need to collect high quality data on these systems. You need to make sure that the links are relevant. So it's not just linking everything to everything, because that would provide very low value. It needs to make sure that the relationships are maintained and it's high quality relationships here in the system. A couple tips here to help you out with those relationships is forms. When you're setting up your submittal forms, your RFI forms here in the system, make sure they have mandatory fields on them. So this way you can make sure that when the contractor's filling out a submittal form, it links to a spec and a drawing. You know, when a project manager is reviewing a submittal or an RFI and they think there's an issue, they're using the risk tracking log or the risk register to create a link to that particular issue. And you want to make it easy for the project participants to use. You know, if it's too difficult, users are going to take another route. You need to make it the easiest path to the highest quality information. You also need to make sure that you've got the reporting tools. You know, how are you going to use this information in reports? Can you bring up the network diagrams? Can you bring up a list that says, okay, give me all the submittals relevant to a particular drawing? Because this reporting tool is where you're going to start to see the value. As your staff creates these links and relationships, you're going to want to use the reports to drill down into that information, use it for navigation in the system. And then we'll touch on a little bit after the project is complete, the O&M tie. You know, with relationships, it's not just an RFI to a submittal or a submittal to a drawing. It can also be the submittals related to a pump. And so you can link this information to those major materials. And this is going to tie a little bit into next week's presentation on operations and maintenance preparation as well. So I can create the links around how does my data and communication on this job, O&M manuals, warranties, test reports relate back to those major materials on my project. And use that for navigation in the system. Some notes here on the information relationships and claims. One of the big things that attorneys will do and claims consultants will do is they're going to go back and build those diagrams for you. They're going to try and build that story for you of how did this issue on this project turn into a claim. And when they're defending a client or a CM firm, or they're building a case for a contractor on the claim, they're going to go back through all the information on this particular project, all the documentation, all the communication. They're going to build that story. One of the big advantages to using an organized system like EADOC, where all that data is here and structured for you guys and all those relationships are maintained, is with the click of a button, they can run that report and see that complete story for them. So instead of spending potentially hundreds or thousands of hours on a particular claim, you can actually do it with the click of a button and reduce a lot of costs and legal costs for you guys. At the CMAA conference in Chicago, they did an analysis where they figured out if their law firms had to go through 60 gigs of data, it cost $4 million in that law firm just going through that particular data because it was not organized and structured. In a more structured format, that cost reduced to about $600,000. So to go from $4 million to $600,000 in legal costs is quite substantial, just in terms of comparing a very structured and organized project management system type job with one where they had done nothing but emails and hard drives for storing that data. So it's just a huge cost savings in analyzing the claims and change orders and using those information relationships. And it's also going to give you that validity. Very quickly, you guys can determine, you know, is this a valid claim from a contractor, because you've got those rigorous procedures in place. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and jump out of the PowerPoint slides here and take you through a scenario here in the EADOC application. Essentially, we're going to do the RFI to risk to change order process. And I can see here's the relationship diagram that I got spelled out. And so I'm going to take you through some of the steps, you know, the forms. Here, when is the contractor filling out the form? How are we tying in with the communication, the proposal requests, the change orders, the risk items, and show you how easy it is to manage this information in the system for you guys. And so this way you can see there's not a whole lot of labor involved in terms of this. It's just day-to-day activities, managing your capital projects in terms of managing the flow of information here in the system. So what we're going to go ahead and do is jump out of the PowerPoint slides here. And we're going to bring up a wastewater treatment plant upgrade project. And so what I can see, here's the report in the system that I've run. I'm showing you a screenshot there on the PowerPoint slides. Here's the actual report where I've put in proposal request number 8, and it shows me change order 5 is related to it. Risk item number 88 is linked to it. I can see there's a memo. There's a request for PCO based on response to an RFI that came in from my contractor, RFI 39, and then here's that risk item linked to the RFI as well as some drawings. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and drill down into this particular RFI. And so what I can see is this RFI is actually started out with a subcontractor. So the subcontractors created the RFI in the system. They've gone ahead and identified a subject, a request, location where this particular issue is occurring, and then they've identified a couple drawings. So it looks like a detail was missing on E200, or it was called out on E200, but it's not shown on the E100 drawing. So what we've seen here is this information was entered in the system. I can see that my subcontractor filled out the form. And what I'll do is when I take a look at the form here, here's a blank RFI form, I'll notice all my links are drop-down menus. This is one of the aspects that goes to high-quality information. Do not allow your users to type in data. When you allow them to use drop-down menus here for things like references, like drawings, they're going to go ahead and look up in your particular pile of drawings here in the system the exact drawing that they want to reference. So it's very easy for them to find it. If you were to say give them a field where they need to type in E00500 and they add a 1 to it, you've just depleted your data quality. There's a real high risk for potential error in terms of users entering that information incorrectly. So anytime you want users to link information together, we recommend the drop-down menus or the lookup tools here. And this leads to much higher quality links and relationships between relevant information. The other added benefit too, I don't have it on this form, but you can make links mandatory. So you could say every time a contractor or subcontractor fills out an RFI form, they have to link it to the relevant drawing. They have to link it to the relevant specification. So this way, these relationships are mandatory. Likewise, you could tell them, hey, you have to link it to a major material. So if it's a question regarding a generator, they're going to have to link it to that particular generator here in the system. Likewise with locations. Again, drop-down menus, very easy for the subs to fill out. So they can go ahead and they can fill out the form and they can identify exactly where this RFI is related, the location on the project, the materials, the drawings, the specs, and this is the beginning of that whole relationship process for you. So you want to make sure the way you're setting up the EADOC system or any project management tool is to gather really high quality data. This goes back to that garbage in, garbage out. If you have high quality data coming in, those relationship tools are going to be invaluable for you guys on down the road. So if we go ahead and cancel out of this draft RFI, and we'll take a look back here at our RFI number 39 that was part of our change order. I can see here these locations are also going to be used for navigation. So the benefit of these links isn't just for the project managers in terms of evaluating risk and claims and change orders on the project, but it can also be used by the inspectors in terms of navigating back and forth between the relevant content. So if I click on links here, I can see all my documentation and communication tied to this electrical drawing. I can see my RFI 39, I can see submittals, I could have inspector daily reports tied in here, specialty inspections, punch list items, everything relevant to this information. Within capital projects, we're generating a lot of data, and this relevance makes life a lot easier for the project participants at the job level, inspectors out in the field, the contractor side, and then at the management level as well. And so from these particular drawing lists, I can go ahead and click on my RFI. It's going to take me back to the RFI here. Now what I can see here is from the RFI number 39 is there's a risk item on it. And so it's been flagged as risk item number 88. And so this is where my project manager went ahead, Kathy in this particular instance, and flagged this particular RFI, said, hey, this is going to be a potential issue that could lead to a change on my project. So just identifying those issues, that's typical project engineer, project manager responsibilities, they can create those flags here on the fly and identify it. Now what's unique about the EADOC system is this risk item is only going to be seen by the PM, CM firm, or the owner that put this item on it. So each organization can keep these internally. And within this risk item, if I drill down into it from my RFI, I can see here's where my notes are. So I can see that Kathy spoke with the designer. They forgot the detail. The detail is missing, so stainless steel material instead of galvanized. So they've identified that there's going to be a potential cost impact coming from the contractor on this. There's not going to be any delay impact, so they put a 0 here. Identify about potential $4,000 and 75% chance of this becoming a change order. And so by just flagging this issue, I've already identified, hey, do I have enough contingency to cover this particular risk item in it? And so I can start tracking these. And then down here, I've identified the RFI 39 that relates to. And so I can see that link listed here. And then I can see that this risk item did become a proposal request. And so I can see that relationship linked here. And if I want to go back to the RFI, I can see below the RFI itself, here's the response from my designer. And the designer has come back and said a DCM number 39 has been issued with detail 80100. This is where my designer is already saying, hey, there's a DCM in process. So even though the original issue was created through an RFI, the resolution was done through a design clarification memo. And keep in mind these processes and procedures are going to differ based on how you guys manage your capital projects and how do you guys handle changes to contract drawings on your capital management procedures. Now, if I go ahead and take a look back at my risk item here, I can drill down to it. I can see the proposal request has been linked in. So if I click on the proposal request, it's going to take me directly to it. Again, I'm using my links for navigation around the system, and I can see that my proposal request is linked to my risk item. I can see it's also linked to memo number 13. And if I drill down into memo 13 here, this was my notification from my contractor. So after the contractor received the RFI response, they received the design clarification, they said, okay, we're requesting a potential change order. So that entire communication trail is logged in the system, from the initial RFI, the RFI response, the designer's clarification, the contractor requesting the memo. That whole audit trail is here for you guys. And then with the contractor requesting the PCO, I can go back to my PCO tab here, and I can see my memo 13 link. I can also capture the contractor's response. So once you issue that potential change order or request for a quote to your contractor, then they can respond back with the dollars and days. So all the activity is being tracked here in the system. All the dollars are coming in, the issues, the memos, the design, all here in the system in a single tool. And this is what's going to lead to you guys delivering those diagrams and running those reports. Very consistent, high quality data. All your procedures are mapped out, so it's real easy for the participants to execute. And then you can even roll that cost proposal up into the change order after it's been approved. So if I go up into my change order, this one, number 5, I can see here's PCO number 8, that change for the drawing. And so all these different documents, this is what's leading us into our report. So just those standard practices and procedures, your standard contract management procedures for handling changes and design clarifications are all leading you to a high quality report here where I can put in proposal request number 8. It shows me it's part of change order number 5. I can see my risk item here. I can see the memo, the request that came from the contractor. And so here's my whole storyline. So when somebody comes back to me and says, okay, how do we end up at this change order for stainless steel strut to go to galvanized or galvanized to stainless steel? I can bring up this diagram. I can draw out that picture that says, hey, here are the detailed drawings that were missing the detail. Here's the RFI from the contractor, the memo, the design clarification from the designers, into my proposal request, into my change order on the job. So I'm continuing those relationships throughout the project, mapping it here in the system for you guys. Then what I can do, drill down to my change order, is take it even one step further. The one link that I don't have on that diagram for you guys is the link into the pay estimates. And once you approve the change order, then it's going to show up on the payment applications. So it's not just for the relationship diagram, but it's also for data consistency. As you guys do reviews and approvals, the data is rolling over from one module to the next. Once you approve a contractor's change order, then you want them to be able to bill against it in their pay estimates. So it's not only linking the data, but it's reusing the information. You want to capture it at the source, RFI from a subcontractor, PCO from the owner, DCM from the designer, and you can see your whole team was involved with this process. Every project participant, the information they created was put directly into EADOC. So if I look at my DCM number 4, for example, I can see it was created by my designer here in the system. And I can map it out. And one of the things I was touching on as well is being able to link this to O&M equipment. How do I track this heading into our O&M discussion next week? I'm not just linking this information with PCOs and schedule values. I can also link it, my risk item, to schedule activities. So if this item was going to delay the project, I could go ahead and add a schedule activity here that I could link it to. And so again, I can look up from my drop-down menu. I've got my schedule here in the system. So say, for example, it was going to impact this particular activity, digester number 1 and 2, bridge modification. I can display that here. Now that I've added this link here, if I go back to my relationship report, I can go ahead and bring that report up as well. I'll extend this out. And I can see that my risk item 88 is now linked to schedule activity 21. And you can see that I can increase and decrease my degrees of separation as well in my relationship. So how far out do I want this diagram to grow? Do I want to go all the way out to 4 levels, 5 levels? What do I want to map? And it really goes back to what are you looking at? What are you evaluating and researching in terms of how many levels of separation do you want in the system? And then from here, if I'm ever looking at schedule activity 21, I can see things like the predecessors are all linked to it, the successors are linked to it, and I can click on links, and I can see here's my risk item. Again, click on my risk item, and it's going to take me directly to it here in the system. Now, as far as linking it to those major materials, so taking this data forward one step into the operations and maintenance side, where you get away from the risk management and you get into the O&M side, which we'll talk about in more detail next week, is I can track those major materials here in the system. So when I go into links, I can see my submittals, warranties, test reports, everything relevant to this major material. And I can navigate back and forth from these. This is kind of a little side note for you guys. Most of this relationship is going to be managed or based around contractual responsibilities, the design clarification process, like I was showing you here. Bring back our relationship one. A couple notes I'll show you guys too as well. If I take a look at my DCM here, all that history, so not only do I have the relationship, but I can see exactly the designer, the review process is all mapped out here for you guys in the system. And then with EADOC, you're going to be able to link anything to anything. If there was an inspector request around this issue, if there's a field condition, punch list item, it's all going to be able to link back in. So any data that's generated on the project, any forms that are filled out, will be pushed into the system. One area that we really like to emphasize on those mandatory fields is on your submittal forms. So this way, when you're creating a new submittal, you'll see the mandatory link. Tie those submittals with locations. There's obviously going to be instances where a contractor's filled out a submittal form for some generic materials that are going to apply to the entire project site. And so for those, you can have a location called either all or project site. So any generic commodities, pipe, fittings, things like that, they're going to apply to the entire project. We recommend an all location. And then for the more detailed areas, especially when you get into shop drawings, they're going to identify the exact location where that material is going to be installed. Same thing down here with specs and drawings. When the contractor's filling out the submittal form, you want them to reference a spec and drawing. And you can see it's very easy for me to fill out these forms. If I'm a contractor filling out the submittal, I can identify the drawing. And this tool has a lot of benefits as well for that particular party that's filling out the submittal form. They're preparing for the work. This is a valuable tool that's going to help their superintendents save them time and energy on the project as well. So grab some mechanical specs, save the form, and you'll see it here in the system. And one thing to note with these forms, one thing we do, say for example, if I don't put my location link on it, I delete my location here, it's going to tell them exactly what's missing. So this way the contractor knows what they have to go in and complete, and you won't see a submit button appear. So this way, if they don't fill out that form correctly, then they're not going to be able to turn in the information. They won't be able to send in the submittal or the RFI for review with the project. So again, maintaining really high quality data in the system is imperative when you get going to your relationships, because you want to be able to draw out that says, okay, this submittal has these spec and drawing links. How do I get those relationships? Through those high quality forms. How do I get these relationships up here, the proposal request? This is done through your project managers, managing the project, managing the risk and the issue items on that particular job. Talk a little bit about one of our clients, East Bay Mud, has got a challenging project on their hands. And what they're doing is with every single change order that they turn over to their legal counsel, currently their counsel has to review every change on the job, they're providing a copy of this relationship diagram. So this is that story that they're handing over to their legal counsel that says, okay, here's all the documentation for you, all the backups, all the electronic PDF files, and then here's the relationship diagram that goes with it. And so this way it gives their legal counsel a head start in terms of evaluating how they ended up at that particular change on the job. It's a complete narrative story here with a graphical diagram that says, here's the process that we went through to get to this change. Here's the issue items, here's the RFIs, the submittals, design clarifications, whatever it may be that supports that change to the project. And it's an excellent tool for them. To save their legal counsel a lot of time and energy, and a lot of time and energy on the project manager side as well in terms of educating the legal counsel. Because one of the things is when you do get into change orders and claims is the PMs are going to have to bring up that counsel or those consultants that you've hired on that particular project. You're going to have to educate them on the job itself. You're going to have to educate them on your processes, your procedures. And with this tool, you can do it all with graphics. So you're going to reduce that essentially training time of your project team that's involved in that particular claim or change. Feel free to contact myself if you are a current client and you do want some configuration changes made, or you saw something here, or you want some training. Feel free to fill out a support request within the EADOC application. You can contact us directly through the tool, whether it's scheduling a training class or making some configuration changes, or just a question about anything you saw here today on this webinar.